Mr.ShroomCaster. There's no guidebook for picking up the pieces of your life after it's been shattered. My attitude toward life? It's different now. People ask if I'm bitter, if I'm angry, if I feel cheated. The answer is yes, to all of it. But those feelings are just the surface. What lies deeper is something words fail to capture. A mix of fear, gratitude, and a strange detachment from the world I once thought I understood. Before this nightmare, I was your average guy with a decent job, a small but close circle of friends, and a fiancé who made me believe in the future. That life vanished in the blink of an eye, replaced by 2 years of hell. But let me back up. This isn't a story you can skip through and still understand. You need to know it all. Because if this could happen to me, it could happen to you. It started with a knock at my door. I remember the day clearly. It was a bright Sunday afternoon, and I had just come back from grocery shopping. My fiancée, Mia, was inside the house blasting pop music, organizing the pantry like we were hosting a Food Network show. I opened the door to find 2 officers standing on my porch. They were polite but firm, asking me to step outside. When I did, one of them pulled out a photograph, a teenage girl with bruises and a haunted look in her eyes. "Do you know this girl?" one of them asked. "No," I said, confused. "Mr. Andrews, we have a warrant for your arrest. Turn around, please." I froze. The words barely registered. "Wait, what is this about?" "Turn around," the officer repeated, this time with a hand on his holster. The next thing I knew, I was cuffed and shoved into the back of a patrol car while my neighbors peeked through their curtains. Someone filmed it, of course, because in the age of social media, why miss the chance for some local drama? The interrogation room felt like a freezer, and the metal chair I was sitting on might as well have been a block of ice. Across from me sat a detective, his face hardened into a permanent scowl. He slid a folder across the table and opened it, revealing more photos of the girl. "She says you followed her from the park, lured her into your car, and assaulted her," he said, his voice as cold as the room. "What? No, that's insane. I've never seen her before in my life." "Your car matches the description. We found DNA evidence. Witnesses saw someone fitting your description in the area." My head spun. DNA evidence? Witnesses? None of it made sense. I was at work the day they claimed this happened, surrounded by coworkers who could vouch for me. I told them as much, but the detective just leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a smirk. "You can deny it all you want, Mr. Andrews, but the evidence says otherwise." By the time I was taken to the county jail, the news had already spread. My mugshot was plastered all over local TV stations with headlines like, "Man arrested in connection with violent assault on teen girl." When I was allowed my one phone call, I dialed Mia. She answered on the first ring, her voice shaky. "They're saying you did something horrible," she said, barely able to get the words out. "I didn't, Mia. I swear to God I didn't. You know me." "I do. But why would they arrest you if they didn't have proof?" That question cut me deeper than any accusation. If even the woman who knew me better than anyone had doubts, what chance did I have with the jury of strangers? The trial was a nightmare. The prosecution painted me as a wolf in sheep's clothing, a man who hid his violent tendencies behind a friendly smile. They brought up my hobbies, my social media posts, even my childhood as if every detail of my life was a red flag. My lawyer did his best. He presented my alibi, pointed out inconsistencies in the evidence, and questioned the reliability of the DNA sample, which had been mishandled during processing. But the jury didn't care. When the verdict came in, the courtroom was silent except for the pounding of my heart. "Guilty," the foreman said. Mia broke down in tears. I just stared at the floor, my world collapsing around me. Prison isn't a place you live. It's a place you survive. When I was first processed, they handed me an orange jumpsuit that didn't fit, a thin mattress pad, and a set of rules I was supposed to memorize. But the real rules weren't written down. They were unspoken, enforced by glances, fists, and the brutal law of the yard. I learned quickly what my label meant in here. Even among criminals, there's a hierarchy, and at the bottom are people like me, those accused of crimes against women and children. It didn't matter that I was innocent. Inmates didn't care about trials or evidence. They only knew what the papers and TV said, and that was enough. My first day, I was assigned to a cell with a guy named Marcus. He was older, in his late 40s, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. He barely looked at me when I walked in, his attention fixed on the chessboard he'd carved into the metal table. "Don't touch my stuff," he muttered, not bothering to glance up. I didn't respond. I was too busy trying to figure out how to fit myself into this 6 by 8 foot box without upsetting the balance of power. The first incident happened 3 days in. I was walking back from the chow hall, keeping my head down like Marcus had advised, when a guy bumped into me. He was huge, with arms covered in crude tattoos and a sneer that could cut glass. The shove wasn't accidental. "Watch where you're going, scum," he said, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of the nearby guards and inmates alike. The hallway seemed to freeze, everyone's eyes snapping toward us. I didn't mean," I stammered, but he grabbed me by the front of my jumpsuit and slammed me against the wall. "You think we don't know who you are?" he growled, his breath hot against my face. "You think we don't know what you did?" "I didn't do anything," I protested, panic surging in my chest. "Yeah, sure," he said, his lip curling. "You're a real saint. But don't worry, we'll make sure you pay anyway." Before he could follow through on his threat, a guard barked at him to back off. The man let go of me with a shove, smirking as he walked away. The guards didn't care about what had just happened, and neither did anyone else. That night, I barely slept. Every sound, a shuffle, a whisper, a creak of the metal bed frame, felt like the prelude to an attack. Marcus became an unlikely lifeline. Though he didn't talk much, he gave me critical advice. "Keep your head down," he said one evening while studying his chessboard. "Don't make eye contact with anyone who looks like they're looking for a fight. And if someone offers you something, anything, you say no. Got it?" "Yeah," I said, though my voice betrayed my fear. He glanced up then, his dark eyes meeting mine for the first time. "They'll try to break you. Don't let them." Despite his gruff demeanor, Marcus had his own sense of honor. Over time, I learned he'd been in for over a decade on drug charges. He kept to himself, avoiding gangs and fights, and somehow managed to avoid getting dragged into the chaos of prison politics. I envied his detachment, but I didn't have his experience or his reputation. To everyone else, I was just fresh meat. The first time I was attacked, I was in the showers. It was late, most inmates having already returned to their cells. I'd waited until the last minute, hoping to avoid anyone who might be looking for trouble. I was rinsing soap from my hair when I heard footsteps behind me. Before I could turn, something hard slammed into the back of my head, sending me sprawling to the floor. I tasted blood and saw stars as two men stood over me, their faces twisted in anger. "This is for what you did," one of them said before kicking me in the ribs. I tried to curl into a ball, but the blows kept coming. Kicks, punches, a sharp jab to my side that felt like it cracked something. I was gasping for air, my vision blurring, when the sound of a whistle cut through the haze. The guards had arrived, yelling at the men to back off. The attackers scattered, leaving me crumpled on the tile. A guard grabbed my arm and yanked me to my feet. "Get it together," he said, not unkindly but not with any real sympathy either. "You want to survive? Toughen up." They didn't even bother taking me to medical. I staggered back to my cell, clutching my side, where Marcus shook his head at me. "First of many," he said simply. "You're lucky they didn't kill you." Physical pain was one thing. The psychological toll was another. The constant tension, the ever-present threat of violence, the knowledge that no one, guards or inmates, had my back. It wore me down day by day. I started talking less, eating less, sleeping less. Every interaction felt like a minefield, every glance a potential threat. I was jumpy, paranoid, and exhausted. I lost weight, my clothes hanging off me like rags, and my reflection in the scratched metal mirror became a stranger's face. There were rare moments of humanity that kept me going. A kind word from Marcus. A book passed along by another inmate who wasn't looking for anything in return. Letters from Greg, updating me on his efforts to appeal my conviction. These were the scraps of hope I clung to. But for the most part, prison was a war zone, and I was on my own. Every day was a battle to make it to the next without breaking completely. Every night, as I lay on my thin mattress staring at the ceiling, I reminded myself of one thing. I didn't belong here. And one day, I would prove it. Mia visited me for the first 6 months. She held my hand through the glass, promising she'd wait for me. But as the months dragged on, the visits became less frequent. One day, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Mia. "I can't do this anymore," she wrote. "I'll always care about you, but I need to move on." That letter broke me. I couldn't blame her. Who would want to tie their life to someone society had branded a monster? But it didn't make the loss any easier to bear. 18 months into my sentence, I had stopped hoping for good news. Every appeal had been denied. Every attempt to prove my innocence had been met with roadblocks. But when the guards called my name to report to the warden's office one afternoon, something felt different. Greg, my lawyer, was waiting for me inside the warden's Stark office. His tie was slightly crooked, and his face was flushed, a mixture of triumph and anger. "You're getting out," he said, barely able to contain his emotions. "What?" I asked, unable to process the words. "You've been exonerated," he said, sitting forward. "The girl." She recanted her story. My heart leapt, but confusion quickly followed. Why now? What changed? Greg's expression darkened. The truth finally came out. The man who actually attacked her confessed under pressure. "It wasn't you, and it never was." I swallowed hard, feeling anger boil beneath my shock. If he confessed, why didn't this happen sooner? Why did I lose 2 years of my life? Greg leaned back, running a hand through his hair. Because his parents made sure it didn't come out. They're wealthy, connected, and ruthless. The real attacker, Brian Thompson, is their son. I froze. The name was unfamiliar to me. So, I was just a scapegoat? Greg nodded, his eyes filled with barely restrained fury. Brian's parents knew he'd assaulted the girl, but they weren't about to let their son go to prison. They manipulated the investigation, bribed witnesses, and even influenced local law enforcement to make you their target. The weight of his words crushed me. How did they make it stick? I had an alibi. Your alibi was deliberately discredited, Greg explained. Witnesses who could have vouched for you were pressured to change their statements. DNA evidence was tampered with. It was an orchestrated effort from start to finish. My fists clenched. And the girl? She went along with it under duress. Her parents didn't want to fight the Thompsons. They were terrified of their influence. They convinced her to identify you as the attacker, and the Thompsons made sure the prosecution had what it needed to convict you. The room seemed to spin. I thought about the girl's haunted eyes in the courtroom, her trembling voice. I'd hated her for what she'd said, but now I understood she was just another victim in this twisted game. What happens now? I asked, my voice shaking with equal parts hope and fury. Brian Thompson was arrested this morning, Greg said. The girl came forward with everything. How she was pressured to lie, how Brian's parents covered it up. She gave a full statement to the police. The evidence implicating Brian was overwhelming, and with her testimony, it's airtight. His parents are under investigation for obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and witness tampering. I should have felt relief, but all I could feel was rage. They stole 2 years of my life, I said quietly. 2 years of hell. Greg nodded solemnly. We'll sue them, the Thompsons and the state. They'll pay for this. When I stepped out of the prison gates, the world seemed unfamiliar. The sun felt too bright, the air too clean, and the open space too vast after years of confinement. My lawyer, Greg, was waiting for me. He offered a handshake that felt like a lifeline. Ready to go? He asked, his voice cautiously upbeat. I nodded, unsure if I was. Where would I go? My home was no longer mine. Mia had sold it. My friends had faded away, their silence louder than any words of condemnation. My parents had passed years ago. I was free, but I felt untethered. Greg handed me an envelope. The Innocence Project raised some funds for you. It's not much, but it's a start. I thanked him, though words felt insufficient. Inside the envelope was enough for a few months' rent. It was a practical gesture, but it didn't erase the void left by the years I'd lost. My first night out, I stayed in a motel. The room smelled of cleaning products and stale smoke. The bed, though lumpy, was a far cry from the metal slab and thin mattress I'd grown accustomed to. But sleep didn't come easily. Memories of prison clung to me, their claws refusing to release. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like an approaching threat. Every shadow felt alive. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, wondering if I'd ever feel safe again. Adjusting to life outside wasn't easy. Freedom didn't come with a manual. Every step felt like walking on unfamiliar ground. The weight of those 2 stolen years hanging over me. I was a free man, but I was also a man marked by a crime I didn't commit. The first few weeks were a blur of logistics, finding a place to stay, applying for jobs, meeting with therapists who specialized in helping exonerees reintegrate into society. Greg helped me navigate the legal avenues for compensation. There was talk of suing the Thompsons for damages, as well as filing a claim against the state for wrongful imprisonment. But even with Greg's support, I felt like a stranger in my own life. Simple things like ordering coffee at a cafe or riding the subway overwhelmed me. People stared. Sometimes I thought they recognized me from the news, though they rarely said anything. Other times, I caught myself flinching when someone approached too quickly or raised their voice. The worst part was the loneliness. Mia was gone. She'd moved to another city, started over. She sent me a short letter after my release, apologizing for doubting me, but it didn't offer much solace. Most of my old friends had drifted away, unsure how to act around me. Even my family was distant. They'd supported me in the beginning, but the stress of the trial and conviction had fractured those relationships. One day, while sitting in the small studio apartment Greg had helped me rent, I decided I couldn't keep hiding. If I wanted to reclaim my life, I needed to confront the world head-on. I pulled on a jacket, grabbed my keys, and headed out. The park where the girl had been assaulted was just a few miles from my apartment. I hadn't planned to go there. It was a decision made in the moment. I stood on the edge of the playground, watching kids laugh and chase each other while parents chatted on nearby benches. It was an ordinary scene, but it stirred something in me: anger, grief, and a yearning for the normalcy I once had. "Excuse me." A woman's voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see a young mother holding her toddler's hand. Her eyes flickered with recognition, but her tone was polite. "You're the man from the news, aren't you?" I hesitated. "Yes, that's me." Her expression softened. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for what you went through. It's horrible what they did to you." I nodded, unsure of what to say. "Thank you." She smiled faintly before leading her child to the swings. I watched them go, a mixture of relief and unease washing over me. Not everyone believed the worst about me, but enough did to make me wary. Later that evening, I met Greg for dinner at a small diner. He had news. "The civil case is moving forward," he said between bites of his sandwich. "The Thompsons are trying to settle quietly, but I think we can push for more." "What about criminal charges?" I asked. "They're ongoing. Obstruction of justice and witness tampering are serious offenses, and the DA is determined to make an example of them. Brian's going to face a hefty sentence, too. The evidence is overwhelming." I stared at my plate, appetite gone. "It's not enough. They took everything from me, Greg." "I know," he said, his voice steady, "but you're rebuilding. Every step you take now is a step they can't take from you." I wanted to believe him, but rebuilding felt like climbing a mountain barefoot. My name was technically cleared, but the stigma wasn't so easily erased. Employers were hesitant to hire me. Strangers whispered when they thought I wasn't listening. And every time I saw a police officer, I couldn't help but tense up. Months later, I found work at a small hardware store. The owner, an older man named Paul, had read about my case and believed in second chances. The job was simple: stocking shelves, helping customers, but it gave me a routine and a purpose. One afternoon, as I rang up a customer, she handed me exact change and said, "I'm glad you're doing okay. People deserve the truth." I managed a weak smile. Moments like that were rare but meaningful. They reminded me that not everyone saw me as the man I was accused of being. Life wasn't easy, and it probably never would be. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving forward. The scars of my ordeal would always be there, but I'd learned something important. Freedom isn't just about being out of prison. It's about choosing to live, even when the world seems determined to hold you back.